Hello everyone and welcome back to the second part of the lesson. We were talking about the writer Amar Kali and the representation of him, how he's representing himself through this article. So we talked about how he's initially scarred by his childhood experiences. I now want to focus a little bit on lockdown and how lockdown is presented for him. Well, lockdown seems to create a bit of fear for him, but more than anything, it seems to create a sense of helplessness. I'm really struck by the passivity in the opening line, how passive he is. When the coronavirus pandemic hit and we were all placed in lockdown, that's an interesting verb phrase there, placed in lockdown, suggesting it was completely not his choice, but also something rather gentle and precise. He was placed there, so it's a really interesting verb choice that he goes for. I think suggesting the sense of him, pragmatically suggesting himself almost here as a prisoner figure being placed into something, and yet no sense of violence about it, just a sense of helplessness. Sorry, I got a bit distracted there by my daughter looking for a pen in her pen bag and making a bit of a rustling noise. Apologies for that. She's been so good sitting there quietly colouring in as well. So he's very passive. There's a sense of him pragmatically being helpless here, but there's also a sense of fear in this too. But I don't think the fear is really his. The fear seems to be the fear that he feels for his friend. In the next paragraph, and we've got for him the outside world had become truly treacherous because he is immunocompromised. We've got a really interesting alliterative adjectival phrase, truly treacherous. I'll say that again, alliterative, which is the adjective form of the noun alliteration. An adjectival phrase where the head word in the phrase is the adjective, the head word being treacherous. So we can focus on that as well, and the sense that lockdown is a place of fear and also a place of being inactive and being rendered really passive. We could also comment on loneliness and how that's presented in here too. However, as the text goes on, he becomes increasingly active. I want you to just have a look now at some of the verb choices that are used here. So I'm looking at grammatical patterns of verbs. And we've got here the present progressive use of verbs, the ing endings to lots of verbs being used here. See if you can find the word doing, seeing, sweating, cheering. All of these within this section here, and it creates a real sense of action going on, doesn't it? He's previously described himself as being incredibly passive, poor at PE, frightened by PE, frightened by exercise, and very passive in the previous paragraph. And now he's really active, and this activity and this sense of action is actually carried through in the language by the use of these present progressive verb choices with the ing endings, creates a real sense of liveliness to the piece. So it's a really interesting pattern of verbs that the writer uses here. Also placing it within the present tense as well creates a sense of the action being immediate and going on in front of you here. The result of this is the pride in his endeavours. He's really proud of himself. Now, I think lots of things give this away, the fact that he's very proud of himself. And one thing I'll comment on here down the bottom is his badge of honour that he mentions about here, a badge of honour. Of course, what we've got here is this is a metaphor, a badge of honour. It's not a literal badge of honour. It's also a noun phrase, so you could describe it as the metaphorical noun phrase badge of honour highlights his pride in himself and this achievement. I also think it's really interesting if we're looking for his development and how proud he is of himself and how the paragraphs begin. So the opening paragraph begins ever since. We've got that time adverb there, that adverb of time, the adverbial ever since. And then we have normally, and then eventually, and then soon, and it ends with now. Look how things are becoming more immediate, very much in the past, ever since. Then when, adverb of time. Then normally, an adverb of frequency. And then eventually, an adverb of frequency. And then soon, an adverb of time. Ending with now, an adverb of time. Things become much more immediate, which I think really creates a sense of pride. So the writer's use of these fronted adverbials, placing the adverbs at the beginning of the paragraph, really emphasizes this. And again, we keep the sense of energy going throughout this paragraph. He's really proud of himself. He's very physically active. His physical activity is highlighted through the real concrete uses of language. He's describing things very visually here and not in the abstract sense. But when the piece ends, it ends with very abstract language. Really language about self-growth, isn't it? It's not just fitness itself. So prior to this, he's focusing on fitness, and now it's about self-growth. Have a look and see if you can find any abstract nouns or stated verbs. Pause the video, then come back to me on that. Okay, welcome back. We've got the abstract nouns of reminder. We've got the abstract nouns of existence. We've got the metaphorical abstract noun of skin in the noun phrase, this brown skin had become a nice place to live. Not skin as the abstract noun, but place as the abstract noun. Maybe skin as a metaphor for identity as well. I think identity really courses through this text. He does tie it to his what he calls brown identity here. Okay, so doing all this exercise makes him fitter and healthier, but look at the mental and spiritual effects it seems to have on him. He grows as a person. This is very typical of a Guardian article, a Guardian piece, where the person is going to be telling like a moral life story, not just a physical health life story. It's this sense of being kind of, we can achieve things in the progressive style that you'd expect to see in The Guardian, which can be really kind of sort of like hippie, happy, clappy sort of thing in some ways, some of its approaches. Now, the final thing I want to focus on is the chronology of the text, because actually you may notice it's circular at the end. I'm going to go at the beginning first, because you can only be circular if you start at the beginning. Let's go at the beginning of the text, shall we? Right. Opening sentence. Ever since my gym teacher stood, arms folded, laughing at my inability as a 4-year-old to tuck myself into a ball and perform a somersault. Focus on that word there, somersault. Let's go to the end. And it ends with, now, just to tackle that somersault once and for all. This is what we call anaphoric referencing. Anaphoric referencing is when you refer back to a word from earlier in the text, and you need a contextual understanding to get this. And I think that contextual understanding is there. It's a short piece, we can get that. We know the somersault he's referring back to is the somersault he struggled to achieve as a young boy. Is this somersault a literal somersault, or is it a metaphorical and spiritual somersault? I'll leave that to your interpretations. Let's think chronologically about this text then. The chronology of this text, the discourse of this text. Dr. Williams has talked about discourse patterns. The exam board love it when you can write about discourse. That is how a text is structured. Well, this text is structured, it's chronologically structured really, isn't it? It's in time order, but it's not as straightforward as that, because it starts in the distant past, as his childhood when he's 4, and then the vast majority of the rest of the piece is chronologically in more or less the present day, but it ends by possibly moving out of chronology and time and into something more metaphysical, something more mystical, something more spiritual. So it's about identity and existence at the end rather than just about events. And that's what something interesting. We could talk about the discourse structure there. So chronologically, but going from distant past to most of the article focusing on a chronological structure to ending with a kind of metaphorical future. Okay. If you want to do a little bit of practice writing with this, I've given you 5 possible stems. You can write about any of the ideas that I talked about within this. Here's a sentence starter. If you want to write up 1 paragraph, that's fine. I'm sure you'll find interesting language things. My aim here was to show you that maybe one representation could run through the whole text if you think you've got loads to say about it. On the right-hand side, in the purple, a reminder of what AO1 is. In the blue, a reminder of AO3 context. A reminder of what the drum I was banging last week in the live lesson. Mr. Bell says, start big, zoom in, then zoom out. Go sentence to phrase to word, then zoom out to pragmatics. Dr. Williams says, spot patterns in discourse or lexis or semantics or phonology or grammar. They're both great ways to do it and then complement each other so well. I hope you found this interesting and I hope you found it useful. And this is the second last lesson we will be sending you. Next up, we'll be writing your analysis on Monday. Thanks very much, everyone. See you later.